Hello everyone, we appreciate you taking time out today to join us for Living on the Living Allowance. Before we begin today's session, I want to draw your attention to a poll that is now open in the lower right corner of your screen. So just take a moment to answer these questions because the responses will give us a sense of who's on today's call. So I invite you to participate in this session in several ways. If you have questions for our presenter, you can submit them anytime by using the Q&A feature in the bottom right corner of your screen, and we will do our best to work them into the presentation or to address them during the formal question and answer portion of the session. If you have technical issues, just let us know through the Q&A feature. We'll have plenty of time to answer questions that come in through the Q&A and to take more of your questions by phone later on in the session. So you can share your tips, resources, and ideas with other attendees by using the chat feature, also found on the right-hand corner of your screen. You can send a chat message privately to the host and presenters, but your message to attendees will be visible to everyone. So keep that in mind as you compose your message. If chat becomes distracting, you can minimize the window pane by clicking on the small triangle to the left of the word chat. Right now, all the phone lines are muted to keep background noise to a minimum, but as said, later on we'll open the phone lines to take more of your questions. So I can see we display the phone number and the passcode in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So if you do get disconnected, you'll be able to call back in. And if you get disconnected from WebEx, you can rejoin using the link that was originally emailed to you. Keep in mind, you're interested in hearing the session without having to dial in from a phone. You can consider using a voice over internet service such as Skype or Google Voice, and by using your computer, a headset, or one of these free devices, you can participate fully without using your mobile phone minutes or tying up your organization's phone line. So maybe that's something to keep in mind for the next webinar that you participate in. So this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the webinar for this page of the campus, along with all the other sessions that we've presented. Slides for this presentation will be sent in a follow-up email along with additional resources on today's topic. Keep the conversation going for 30 minutes after the conclusion of the formal presentation to answer additional questions from the Q&A and to take more of your questions by phone. Just a moment. Welcome to this webinar for VISTA's Living on the Living Allowance. I'm your host, Liz Matthews, AmeriCorps VISTA Outreach Specialist here at the Corporation for National and Community Service. So know that addressing poverty in your community is challenging, and managing your own personal finances can seem just as hard. So today we'll be looking at what strategies have worked for VISTAs to manage their year on the Living Allowance. And Mark Wilson, an AmeriCorps VISTA Program Specialist here at CNCS, will show you ways you can use budgeting to pursue success as well as provide strategies for living on your stipend. Also hear tips and stories from current members and alums as they figured out ways to cut costs and live simply during their service year. Before I introduce the team behind today's call, I just want to take a moment to say that we recognize that living on the Living Allowance and finances in general are of a personal nature. So each comes to VISTA with different resources and debts, and your living allowance rates will vary slightly. Some of you may be supporting a partner or a child, and some of you may have additional support from a parent or a partner. So for some of you, VISTA may be your first job and your first time managing your own finances, and others may have been managing your budget for a long time. So we just want to recognize these differences and experiences and keep in mind that our presenters are sharing tips from their own experiences. So our intention with this webinar is to help you be aware of your resources and expenses and find tips that will work for you. So I am joined by Suzanne Knisner, Robin Stegman, and Mel Bond, all from Campaign Consultation, as you can see on the screen there. And today's presenter is Mark Wilson, my colleague here in Washington, D.C. Mark served as a VISTA for 2 years with the Native American Youth and Family Center in Portland, Oregon, and then became a VISTA leader with Friends of the Children, also in Portland. So Mark here now with CNCS as a program specialist. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Liz. And I think as we're starting to see from the poll, and as Liz mentioned, everybody on the call has a really varied experience going to Vista. The resources that you start your year with are probably also really varied, and the resource that you have access to might vary depending on whether you live in an urban area or whether you're rural, whether you relocated for service, or whether you started Vista right out of college, or whether you have prior budget experience running a household. Which is all to say the only expert on this call regarding your personal financial situation is you. And I know a lot of this advice might actually seem to be common sense. And I can remember that that might be a little frustrating because we know, and I've seen as a Vista alum, that it can be a time where you really struggle when you're a Vista. So for me, from my point of view, I'm hoping that this webinar will be a refresher and a reminder that there are positive things that we can do to support each other and also to support ourselves, and also a chance, a call to action to go to Vista campus, see resources there, go on the Vista forums, and see some of the money-saving ideas that other Vistas have posted in the past. To that end, I'm actually going to speed a little bit through some basic ideas and skills that we're going to talk about maintaining a budget. We can get to the really good stuff. So we can get to the part about the resources on the campus, and then we'll also have some time to use the chat function and use the dial-in to do some resource sharing from everybody on the call and to just some ideas and brainstorm a little bit. So invited Lara Roberts, who is a current Vista, who is staring down the beginning of a second year as a Vista in Jackson, Tennessee, and she's going to help us kick off that discussion later in the webinar. So I know I'll feel like this call has been a success. This conversation bleeds over into the campus forums, and we're able to keep it rolling. And so to that end, we'll talk about ideas that you do before you make a budget, or just in addition to making a budget. And then we'll talk about budgets, we'll talk about the campus, and we'll share resources. So how are we coming with that first poll?
Do have the poll results available, so I want to go ahead and go through that with everybody here on the webinar. And it looks like the biggest area of expense for everyone is housing at nearly 70%, and that's not very surprising because that is true across the country as well. Your next biggest expense is transportation, followed by debt, followed by grocery, and a couple people do have, and then a couple people say don't know. So that's really good to hear because we will be able to go through that when we're looking at our budget. I know Mark has some good plans for us today. And which of the following situation best describes the one that you are in? Almost 50% is the I've supported myself before and took a pay cut to become a Vista. So thank you for responses to this poll, and I will hand it back to Mark.
I'm actually going to start a file from the Chronicles of Really Obvious Research, which is to say last year the University of Chicago did a study where they set participants up in a game, kind of like Monopoly, where some participants were given good resources and other participants had less money and had less borrowing opportunities. And so really interesting, but also probably obvious to most of us thing the University of Chicago confirmed is being poor is really stressful, and also that fatigue up over time, and the work money can led the participants in this study into making worse decisions, and even led them to borrow more money from the bank in the game than was productive because they felt like it was something they had to take advantage of when maybe it wasn't such a great way to get ahead. So that leads me to some kind of unconventional advice about budgets, because another way to say what the University of Chicago discovered is that the feeling of having few choices can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's really easy to look at numbers on a page and feel like you have nowhere else to go. And one way is to look outside that page. We all know budgets are really stressful sometimes, to think about money all the time, to take time aside and really just take action, to take those small steps that you can do right now and make things better for yourself, because a small step, of course, is even better than sometimes looking at a page of numbers. So give yourself permission to not think about those money problems during some parts of the day, and set aside time to plan, think about those things, certain hours, so that you're not kept up at night with worry. One of the hard things during my first year as a Vista was that my friends showed up and she told everyone at the organization that she was living off her credit cards and that she had to give her 2 weeks notice to early terminate. And it was really heartbreaking for a lot of us because no one at our organization had any clue about what was happening. And whether we could have changed things or not, I know we all wished we had a time machine so that we go back in time and help her out. And of course, that story is she's doing awesome now, and she went to law school and is a practicing lawyer in Oregon. But the thing to remember is there are ways that your sites can help you out. That's something that we discuss with supervisors at supervisor training. And although it will vary whether your organizations can have the resources to help you out, because we know that organizations that need Vistas to build their capacity might not have the capacity to support a Vista. So leading organization, talking to your supervisor, being open about it, and talking with other Vistas if there's others in your area, so you can be a source for each other. Share meals, plan entertainment together. That kind of stuff can go a long way to making the year feel less stressful. And of course, friends and family, they really do want to help you out. It's really helpful before you're thinking about a budget to brainstorm a list of all those resources you have, even if it's a silly list or it's a list of distant connections in your social network, because you can be really surprised about what's out there.
If I can interrupt really quickly, we do have some participants today who are non-native English speakers, and they've asked if we could just speak a little bit slower during today's presentation so that they can obviously get all the information that we have to share with them.
Yeah, that feedback.
Thank you.
So that leads me to talk about other small things from my experience, to take stock of what you have and also of what you might be spending money on that you don't need. So, for instance, for me, I know that I have a problem with when I buy my lunches at work, and I need to make a budget to know that I spend a lot of money on that, and that is something that I can do by making my lunches and taking them to work. I really admire people who can live simply. There's the people who can, travel out of their carry-on, for instance. And one of my big lessons from being a Vista was that sometimes even cheaper free stuff has a cost. So I acquired a lot of stuff from Goodwill in 3 years of a Vista, so a lot of cheap stuff. And so I was living big on swag from Goodwill. And in 2008, I had the best in technology and entertainment that 1992 could offer. But the thing about living that way was that it made it really hard to move when money went up, and it was emotionally hard to get rid of all that cool, VRs and VHS tapes that I had acquired in 2008. So a horror story that I have is a friend of mine acquired a free couch out of an alleyway. And the scary part was that I was the one who was hanging out in the living room when we found the first bed bug. Really scary. That story also has a happy ending. We all got together and we bug bombed the place. We got lucky, and that was all it took. But the moral and the idea is that sometimes when free, they're not always free of risk or free of cost. It's easier to make big changes if you have a small amount to work with. So that's something to keep in mind. This is where these things happen. It's really important to have built up a safety net of your friends and family and other Vistas and your coworkers. be the ones who are going to remind you what got you excited to join Vista in the first place. We all know we didn't sign up to do an easy thing, and we didn't sign up to have an easy year. So even at the low point in the Vista life cycle that we talk about at PSO, there's always something that keeps you going, whether it's friends or supporters. And obviously you're adding to your resume and you're seeing good things happen in your community. My story is maybe a little unique. My hardest year was actually when I finished Vista. It was the year after Vista, actually. And I can remember one week where I was eating lifeboat rations out of my disaster prep kit to supplement my diet. And they don't taste that great. That was in 2008, and the only way that I could make that fun was to pretend that I was bunkered down like Will Smith against the zombies in I Am Legend. And that was a kind of a wake-up moment for me. And some of the reason that I got into that situation was because I didn't plan ahead. I didn't prepare. I was actually too proud after I finished Vista to reapply for my SNAP paperwork. And so when I first got a job after Vista at $15 an hour at half time, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I thought it was the end-all be-all. I was going to live high on the hog. And so I didn't think of a budget, and I didn't plan to see that my expenses were actually rising faster than my income, even though it seemed like I was getting ahead. And so that's my way of segueing into the idea that if you're not tracking your money, tracking budget, you're not going to know if you're getting ahead or getting behind. As you've probably seen, the only good option is to get ahead because if you're just going out to zero every month, bouncing that budget, it's not going to be sustainable because life is going to happen. So I ended up having to make some really radical changes, some big changes when that Vista hit me hard. So I was able to lean on the good parts of my friends and family, and actually ended up living on a couch for several months and got a job that paid a little bit more. And that was how I saved up enough money to move to DC and take this job with Vista headquarters. So I had to make a choice to let things get worse before they could get better. The thing is, I could have avoided a lot of that pain and suffering if I had just been keeping a regular budget, because I could have seen that I was getting sooner, which may need a budget. So when I talk savings, that sounds like I'm talking about unicorns and leprechaun gold, because the living allowance isn't always conducive to savings. But the goal of a personal budget is really to maximize the amount of money that you're keeping from month to month. If you make that your income equals expenses and everything comes out to zero, that's a great start. But we see that life is going to eventually happen. So even if you're just setting aside $15 a month, $20 a month, it might add up and be exactly the saving piece you needed when an emergency happened. The budget is they can be a motivator. So you can use a budget the same way a runner uses a stopwatch. You can always keep track of what you're doing and always try to keep beating your goals. So in that, you can use it as a diagnosis tool. You can use it to troubleshoot things, to look at the problem areas and the small things that add up. So I'm always awful about buying lunches instead of fixing them. But at the year, seeing a 4-digit number glare in the face, or each month, a 3-digit number, it's a really big motivation for me to fix my lunch, and I'm getting better about that all the time. But I also know that a lot of us have trimmed all those little things, and also help you make a difficult decision, because as we saw in the poll, there are a lot of big ticket items, and those are hard to change. So, for instance, the average cost of owning a car in America is $9,000 a year. And that's an average, so that's factoring in uncommon expenses like maintenance. Sometimes you buy a new car, or you might have an accident. So clearly, one who is doing Vista can afford $9,000 in 1 year. So we cross our fingers there won't be an accident, and we make fewer trips, and we carpool, and we might ask the people we're carpooling with to help with gas money. But those sporadic, those uncommon problems come eventually. So take a hard look at a very difficult to change part of one's life, because it's hard to rearrange how you're using your car. But taking a difficult look at it, that might be the only way to move forward. And your budget will tell you whether it is one of the major areas that is preventing you from moving forward. So another example, many of you have heard that the Vista Living Allowance is based on the poverty level of the county that your site is in. That's only part of the story. The other part of the story is that your living allowance is based best that we can on the HUD fair market housing rates for your county. So the living allowance assumes that in a 2-bedroom apartment and you have at least one roommate. Roommates you have, usually the more affordable your housing is going to be. So that 2-bedroom apartment divided by 2 is about 1/3 of your budget. But it's impossible in some high-rent areas, and some of you might know about that. Just like New York City, the D.C. metro area, areas in Southern California, we know Vistas sometimes spend up to 60% of their allowance on housing. So that is to say, we know it's a big piece of budgets, and sometimes it takes a difficult decision to at least make sure that you're in that 2-bedroom apartment with one other roommate. So we have a second poll. Have you taken the time to create a budget?
Okay, just give me 1 second, and I'll have the poll results for you. I appreciate you giving us some really clear examples, Mark. Actually, the couch example, sometimes free is, not the best thing, depending on what you find. And all right, so we have some poll results. Like the good news is that the majority of people are taking the time to have create a written budget. So that's really great news.
That's heartening news. So a lot of you are better off than I was when I finished my last year of Vista. And so one of the things to keep yourself motivated about that budget, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing this, is after you write the budget, set it somewhere visible so that it can be a reminder to stick to it, or it can be a reminder to see where you're getting ahead or getting behind. It's important to use whatever works for you, and so if writing on scraps of paper works for you, that might be good. Keeping a budget sheet in Excel might work for you. There's free software, or there's services like mint.com. There's cheap software called Maybe You Need a Budget. Those things are things to maybe look into if that is what might work for you. So we also have a simple budget calculator on the Living Allowance page of the Vista campus that we'll show you in a little bit. Best to do your budget certainly on a monthly basis. You start with the amount of money that you had available at the beginning of the month. And then for most of you, if you're getting paid directly from CNCS, you net pay for one of your living allowance statements, tax. And if you double that, since it's a biweekly, that'll give you a good idea of what your monthly income is. That's not perfect because the business is biweekly, and of course, your rent and things like that tend to be monthly. So for the most part, most months have 2 paydays, but some have 3. So if you're planning for 2 paydays each month, it'll also help you get ahead in those months that have 3 paydays. If you're the other way around and planning to always have 3 paydays, you might end up behind. That happens to a lot of people. But we also have a link to the pay calendar, so you can see exactly when those every other week pay stubs are going to come for you on the Vista campus as well. Receiving other types of assistance, such as SNAP, commonly known as food stamps, you can look at similarly to how you see income and add it to your income line to get a total amount of money you bring in every month. You know that the SNAP stands for supplemental, so you're going to end up using money out of your pay for food at the end of the month if you qualify for SNAP, because we all know that that $150 a month per person doesn't last very long. A month it comes down to about $4 a day, which is very difficult to do. So if you're one of the things to keep in mind is Vista does not withhold state and local taxes, and so I can't give you tax advice, but I can tell you that if you live in a state with income tax, you're going to have to think about setting aside money for tax day in April. So my service in Oregon is an income tax. I usually got a refund federal, but I always owed money for state taxes. And so the good news is that there are all kinds of free resources around tax season. There's VITA, which is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. We'll have links to that as well. There's also offers of free tax software for people who make below a certain income. So there's certainly resources to help that tax time become easier, but setting aside a little money if you live in a state with an income tax is really important. And of course, you go on the My AmeriCorps portal and take a look at which taxes we are withholding and what your living allowance looks like going to myamericorps.gov. We're looking at these spreadsheet grids, and we certainly don't mean to imply that you don't know how to create a budget. Again, this is a reminder and a refresher. If you are working with organizations or even helping your beneficiaries create budgets, but the thing is, forcing yourself to write things down and seeing spend might lead you to see ways of spending money that you didn't expect. Definitely different than keeping it in your head. When it comes to expenses, I want to list those fixed monthly expenses first, those things that you know are always going to come to $375 a month for rent, $150 for car payments. If you know your utilities tend to fall around $30, things like that, your cell phone, those expenses, very, very predictable. Start those. And then if you have debt payments such as credit card debt, that amount each month is also an expense. And you always want to make sure you're paying the minimum, but certainly it's always better to pay more than the minimum. You can look at compare fixed expenses. You can look at expenses such as food, which varies from month to month, or clothing, or entertainment, or gifts. Those things you can fiddle with. Those things you can play around with and change and raise and lower and see exactly how much you can distribute those, how those compare. That's why we arrange expenses in those general areas like housing, transportation, utilities, communications, debt payments, food, and then entertainment and personal expenses, so that you can see some of those things are really hard to change and some of those things are easy to change. Other refreshers about living on a budget. It's a way to compare income and the resources that you have with the expenses that you expect to have each month. You want to review it every so often, certainly every month. Some people do every week, and make adjustments to ensure that you have a balance between what you're spending and what you're taking in. The goal of budgeting is to make it you can live within your resources and to always avoid going into debt if you don't need to. Checking in is important. If you go over your budget one month, don't beat yourself up. You can get back on track by one of those flexible areas of expense the next month. Life happens and you just have to be fair to yourself and be flexible. Constantly going over budget, that's a red flag. And so you want to keep a record of everything you spend during the next month maybe, so that you can really pin down what is hurting you and what is making you go over. So if you're, the best you can do is to take a deep look at what's happening and to trim excess spending and keep trying. And so whatever tracking system works for you, whatever record-keeping, filing system works for you, I don't keep every receipt, but I certainly always look at what I'm putting on a credit card and make sure I have enough money in my checking account to pay it off at the end of the month. Having the regular bill paying habits, whatever works for you, if you have bill pay through your online bank account, or whether you keep a file or next to the door where you know all your bills are and you pay them on the last week of every month. Just making sure you have the system that works for you is important, and not beating yourself up if your system is different than other people's, just making sure that you do what you need to get ahead. So I think I mentioned there's online resources, there's the Vista Campus with the budgeting piece, or just use a spreadsheet and pen and paper. Those two, keep track how you need to. Certainly, you want to keep a close eye on your checking account, because if you check, that's another expense, that's another ding against you. And to avoid using credit cards as much as possible. That's not always the easiest thing to do. If you do use a credit card, you track it the same way you would track spending cash. Some people keep a Post-it note in their purse or wallet. People actually write a checkbook the same way they would write it as if they were writing a check, so that it looks to them like the amount of money they have in their checking account is subtracted from the credit that they're spending. Vista, my big credit card hit was actually when my pet cat Hope got pneumonia, and it ended up in a really difficult decision. I actually ended up using a low APR deal I had from my bank on a credit card. And the thing is, the fine print is always going to get you on any of those deals. And so I knew that was the case, and I knew I was taking a risk. Paid my minimum, every month. The first thing I paid every month, because I knew if I didn't pay it, I'd be even worse off. Because if you don't pay the minimums, then you might get hit with an even higher interest rate. The fine print almost always says that. And so I had to make a difficult decision, because we had emergency vet bills. And some vets have credit plans, and that was something we looked into as well. Went into that situation with my eyes wide open, and I paid attention to the risks. It took me a few years to pay it off, but it's it for me because even though it was risky, our cat Hope survived. She got better, and she's actually really thriving. So we're actually going to segue into taking a quick look at the Vista campus. So as you log in through the login, you hopefully have an account, because if you register for an account, you can participate in the Vista forums, which I think is the most useful part of the whole website, personally. And as you log in, you've probably seen this before, you get this bookshelf for the Vista. And in the center square, for those of you who remember Hollywood Squares, the Whoopi Goldberg Square, there's the living allowance section. And then in the bottom middle square, there's finding help. And so we're going to zero in on those two really quickly. The page you get to when you click on the living allowance, there's a course in Flash for living allowance. That's the one with the calculator for you to help work on budget and gives you an idea of whether you're getting ahead or getting behind. There's also a link later on for living allowance calendar, statement information, and jumping over to finding help. This is where you can see what types of options might be available to you if you have an emergency in the Vista handbook. The Vista resource board is really great about giving you ideas about how to live on the living allowance. There's also common questions answered about Seven Corners Healthcare or about the child care. And then if you go into my.americorps.gov, you can see your pay statements and allowance. There's also forums like From Lost to Found and the Cafe and the Dollar Store where you can share ideas for living on the living allowance.
Great.
Thank you. It's like we just come to briefly brief question period. So if this is the Q&A below, they should be able to ask any questions that you have for the presenter. So if you have questions, put them in, and it looks like at the moment we don't have any questions in the Q&A. But we will be answering questions throughout the presentation, so if you have them, please feel free to use that as to communicate with the presenters.
I'm actually seeing some cool ideas jumping up there where someone turned Living the Living Allowance into a game. That's a good way to make it fun to look at that. And we are going to talk now with Lara Roberts. She's a current VISTA serving at the Alliance for Technology Access in Jackson, Tennessee. Laura, what tips do you have for the other VISTAs on the line?
Well, I'm a first-year VISTA, and I will be signing on for a second year in August. And to complement Mark's experience, I'm from a rural area versus urban area. So here in my area, I want to give you some tips on how to save on groceries, things like phone, toiletries, entertainment, what I would consider necessities. First, on groceries, I have found locally my grocer is they have manager discount specials, and those are labeled with orange stickers. Those are usually found along the edges and the produce and friction, meats, dairy, breads, things that are perishable. They're perfectly fine, and usually just the sell dates are coming up. So I usually stock up on those, get loaves of bread for 79 cents and freeze them, whole rooms and freeze those. Anything pretty much can be frozen. Also like to buy whole chickens or leg quarters, break them down, and prepare meals ahead of time and stick them in the freezer. And not does it save money, but it also reduces the likelihood that you're going to go out to lunch. So in the morning, I'll just grab something out of the fridge or freezer, and I'm good to go. Another good way to save, because when I first started here, I found that a lot of the staff members wanted me to go to lunch to kind of get to know me and that sort of thing. And it didn't very long for me to realize exactly how much money I was spending on lunch. So now I'm pretty cautious, and I try to bring my lunch every day. Maybe once a week I'll go out just as a treat. The thing is gas. Actually, the same grocer has a discount. So every $100 that I spend from my SNAP benefits, I get 10 cents off at the pump. So what I try to do is accumulate points, spend the full $200 that I'm allowed through SNAP, and then maybe once a month or once every 3 weeks, I will fill my tank up using those account points. So I'll save 20 cents off at the pump, most for the benefits and for my benefits and for the discount. Then the phone is switched to a prepay phone, where now I get unlimited talk, text, and sorry guys, I get unlimited talk, text, and internet for $4 a month. And you can also go online and get a refurbished phone, so you don't have to buy one at full price, which is what I did. It uses AT&T carrier or towers, so I have great reception, no problems. The thing that I would like to talk about is toiletries. And I found a laundromat that actually provides the laundry soap and fabric softeners and that stuff. So you can look around. Hopefully you'll find a similar laundromat that you can take advantage of that. It really does add up if you don't have a washer and dryer at home. And also, I think that a big misconception is that people think you have to use name brand soaps, shampoos, lotions, that sort of thing. But in reality, just the store version is just as good. So I save there. And if you don't feel comfortable at a low, like a dollar store, you could try the closeout chain stores, which is name brand items. They're just marked down for clearance. internet is a big one that I think a lot of people don't consider a necessity. But let's just be real that as Vistas, we get stressed out, and I think that it is, especially for us, just to have outlet. I'm a library nerd. I love the library because of you can get movies, you can get books, you can use the internet there. Like I don't have internet at home right now. I go to the library or use it at work. You can also check the community events board. Here in our town, we have dinner and a movie that's on the square that they actually block off a street and a movie shown. It's free. You take your blanket and it's a good time. There's also groups online, which there's the Vista group. What I use is meetup.com, and actually a lot of different Vista groups across the country that use it where, maybe once a month you'll get together with other Vistas for coffee or just whatever. Just go out to the park just to have social time. So there are lots of other tips, but I know we're kind of running short on time, so I will just pass it back over, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thanks, Lara. I must say I'm impressed with everything you've said, and the chat is entertaining too. To call Amy, we may have to have you lead a session here. You make your own laundry soap and your own beer, so that's fantastic.
And long walks.
Yes, and long walks.
That was a lifesaver for me because at the Native American Youth and Family Center, if you went out the front door, there was a highway. If you went out the back door, there was a wildlife refuge.
Okay. And that leads me to just share from my Vista experience quickly. This is Liz. I worked at a domestic violence shelter in Southwest Louisiana, and obviously that was stressful for many reasons. And once the director of the YMCA learned that there were 2 Vistas in town, he gave us a free membership, which was fantastic. And the other thing to think about is what is it that your sponsor site does? What is the mission of your organization? We had a full kitchen because the women lived there, so we were able to eat meals and do our laundry there. And if they don't offer, go ahead and ask if that's possible, because of course your sponsor site should be supporting you in any way possible. All right. So, Ron, do you want to or tips that you want to highlight in the chat?
There have been some really great tips that have come through the chat. People are giving right now information about ways to eat. So somebody suggested buying a whole chicken, which is cheaper than buying kind of chicken in parts and making meals off of that. We've had suggestions of going to Goodwill to get tennis rackets to go out and play tennis. There are some great tipping it out just about different places and products that Vistas can use that are cheap and affordable.
Patrick says teamwork makes the dream work, and so he and his roommates money to buy an Xbox 360, which sounds pretty extravagant for a Vista. Actually, some other resources you might use for video games. There's the Humble Bundle, which you can give any money, and it actually goes to charity to get independently made video games. For music, many libraries have free to download MP3s. It's part of the library services, and it's called Regal, Reegal.
I feel like I got cheated because I served before the internet was really a big deal. Go ahead, Robin. What else do you have?
There's a lot of sharing, economy things. Like, I'm trying to remember the name, but there's actually what? I was thinking about time banks are a great example of ways that Vistas can both get services because time bank basically allows you to give an hour of your time to the community, and then the community you can spend that with somebody who will give you an hour back. So it's a great way for Vistas to get more resources while also meeting new people in the community. They could do something like helping with work and in exchange get, vet services or whatever is out there.
So Bradshaw's tip is beans and rice go far. And actually, they can go really far. If you're buying those staples and you have enough time on your hands, which is the hard part. I've seen a website called the Hillbilly Housewife Emergency Menu, and we'll send that link out. She has a $40 menu to feed an entire family, but the trick is you've got to wake up early to start working on soaking those beans for it.
You can always do it overnight. This is great. Okay, well let's move quickly through the next couple of slides so we can open up the phones and hear from you all and not just read your suggestions. So go ahead and take a moment now to fill out the evaluation. We really appreciate it when you all do that because it helps us as we continue to improve our webinars with each one that we conduct. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And just a reminder for your call to action. So you're going to review all these money-saving tips and options that have come up during the course of the call through Mark and Lara and all the tips in the chat. You're going to perhaps make a plan, maybe take a little bit more stock as to what you have been spending your money on, keep track of that, and start a budget. Remember that the Vista campus is there for you. Please utilize it. We spend lots of time creating resources there for you, and we love it when you use it. So check out the campus resources and use the forums. We see people exchanging recipes all the time in there and other tips for living on the living allowance. So watch out for the follow-up email that will contain all this information that we've covered today. So this concludes the formal part of the presentation, and like we said, we'll open up the phone. So please stick around if you'd like to continue the dialogue and get more tips for how you can make your living allowance stretch even further. And also keep in mind that we are having another webinar on Tuesday, July 9th, and the focus of that one is resume writing. So maybe in your service year, you may be at the point where you're starting to think about what you're going to do next, and you're struggling with how are you going to be able to capture what you're doing into your resume in order to get a great job after your VISTA service is over. So if that's the case, please tune in on Tuesday, July 9th at 2 o'clock. Say thank you to Lara for being a part of this webinar, and to Mark for all of his great tips, and to everybody in the chat room and everybody who's been participating. These sessions are much more interesting when we get to hear from you. So why don't we go ahead and open up the phone lines.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please mute your phone and record your first and last name when prompted. To withdraw a question, you may press *2. Once again, please press *1 if you'd like to ask a question. 1, please.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, we can still kind of look at tips. There's been some great ones that have come through. One of them is to be sure you let your community know who you are and what you're doing, and that's a great tip. I don't know if others have had this experience. For instance, I had a community shopkeeper who would give me all the day-old bread and then cheese that was like a day past its expiration but was still good. He would always, I would drop by and he would have like a huge basket of bread and cheese for me. And that was a great way that to get food. And he did that because I had talked to him about the fact that I was a VISTA and he knew the work that I was doing in the community, and so he was more than willing to help out. And I think you find a lot of people in the community, even things small like taking you to dinner, are willing to help out during your year of service.
Robin, that's a great point, and I think it's not just about getting free stuff. It really is about helping to spread the word as to what AmeriCorps Vista is, and a lot of people don't realize the work that you all are doing in your communities. So while we try to market AmeriCorps Vista from our angle here, it really is so helpful to everybody involved. The more that you can tell folks in your community what AmeriCorps Vista is, what it is that you're doing, the more awareness that is built on the program, and the more support, not just in helping you as an individual, but supporting the program overall. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Robin.
So one resource that I don't think is very well known is they're called food ministries, and so these are sometimes nonprofit or sometimes, well, nonprofit groups that like Walmart or Wico or Kroger might operate. They get food at a discount at wholesale rates, and then they mail it out to people who sign up. And so you can get a lot of non-perishable food from a food ministry each month for pennies of what you'd be spending normally. And so I added a link chat about food ministries. So you actually have packages mailed to you. And they even have vegetarian packages or gluten-free packages sometimes. It's really a cool resource.
I like else said, grow your own food if possible. I definitely had my first garden when I was a Vista. Not only was it fun and relaxing and a stress reliever, but you also had results from your hard work, which were wonderful to enjoy. So that's always great.
One is that SNAP is designed in such a way that you can buy seeds for planting your own garden with your SNAP dollar.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Any calls that have come in?
Yes, we have a question from Jana Kiknaso.
I sent a question in to the host. It's got to do with both presentations today and last week. During the webinars, we're being told that we receive a copy of a PowerPoint and sometimes additional information from a speaker, and I'm not receiving any of those, and I'm just curious as to how long it will be before we get information from today's, and how do I check the previous webinar that took place, just motivating volunteers.
Great, thank you for your comment. So it does take us at least a week to get the recording and make sure that it's 508 compliant and put it up on our website and send it out. So that might be why you haven't received the one from last week. So make sure that for the one this week, give us at least a week to process that. If you haven't still received it, are you receiving the notices for the webinars, the email addresses, the emails that go out?
Yes, I'm receiving those, but the speaker for the last webinar on volunteer motivation was going to send additional information, and it sounded like it was going to be paper. And we've never received anything.
You mean in the mail?
No, internet.
Okay, yeah, because we were able to mail.
Well, no, I don't. In other words, a document.
Sure. You can also get the information, and we'll put the link in the chat where all these webinars are hosted on the campus.
Okay.
And folks at Campaign, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
So, we are, Liz, as you said, it takes us some time just to get the recording and the supplementary materials, like we do send out the chat and Q&A. So that's probably why you haven't received last week's, the PDF for last week's webinar. It does usually take us a week, but you'll get it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for regular webinar attendee. We appreciate it. Any other questions on the phone?
At this time, no further questions.
Okay. For those folks managing the chat, Robin, Mark, any others that we want to highlight? Okay.
Carrie O'Keefe writes that they use the YMCA and the sliding scale there for their gym membership.
Nice.
I think we got another tip from Michelle to host a clothing swap.
Oh, good. Make sure people invited that are your size, because I've been to one and it really wasn't that helpful. I gave a lot of stuff away, but all right.
This is Michelle.
Yes.
Just noted that I've been sharing some tips that we've also gotten on our previous webinars on this topic. So they're also being put in the chat, and then when we have the transcript, we'll send that out with the materials. So there's a comprehensive list.
Okay, super. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We really are grateful for all that you're doing across the country. And while it may seem difficult at times, these money-saving tips will last you a lifetime. We have colleagues that still take Greyhound and are living off their living allowance, even though they're now earning a salary. So
you're talking about me, aren't you, Liz?
You and some others. So they are benefits that last a lifetime. So thanks everybody for participating, and please be patient with us as we get the materials organized and send it out to you in the next week or so.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.